Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. An out-of-control car sped toward us. My younger sister, Emily, suddenly shoved me forward. I ended up losing both legs. For the rest of my life, I would be bound to a wheelchair. Later I met Ethan, the powerful CEO of Mulberry Silks. He spoiled me like a princess, giving me everything I never dared dream of. But now, I was reborn, sent back to the day of the car accident. Before I could gather my thoughts, Emily rushed forward and flung herself into the path of the speeding car. Amid the splattering blood, she clenched her teeth through the pain and gave me a smug, triumphant smile. I stared at her, puzzled and conflicted. Wasn't it better to live a normal life, whole and unharmed? The traffic light turned green. Emily and I walked side by side onto the crosswalk. Out of nowhere, a car shot straight toward us. The scene felt both unfamiliar and eerily familiar, leaving me dazed. Before my groggy mind could fully react, Emily suddenly pulled me back with a violent jerk. I was thrown hard to the side of the road. A loud crash rang out. My body trembled in shock, and I looked up in disbelief. My pupils shrank. There was that same familiar spray of blood, but this time the one lying in it was Emily. Her body was still spurting blood, yet she gritted through the agony and gave me that same proud, satisfied grin. Blood bubbled at the corners of her mouth. The whole scene felt twisted and absurd. Watching her crazed, maniacal expression, I frowned deeply. I instantly understood. She had been reborn too. But I couldn't understand why she'd still fight to be the one hit by the car, even after being given a second chance at life. Then a suspicion crept into my mind. Could it be? She wanted to replicate that fateful meeting 6 months from now with that man. The bystanders who saw everything unfold were all dumbfounded and muttering amongst themselves. Is that girl crazy? Yeah, everyone else would run away. She charged straight at the car. Good grief, that was terrifying. Let's get out of here. The gears of fate had begun turning again. I stumbled to my feet, my hands shaking as I dialed emergency services. Sitting beside her, I heard her weak, gasping whisper. This time, I won't give you the blessing. A wave of nausea surged up. I bit down hard on my lip to hold back the stinging tears threatening to spill. What a sick joke. In my previous life, on this very same day, on this very same road, a car came speeding toward us. My sister, Emily, seized the moment and shoved me into its path. My body was launched into the air, and then slammed to the ground. The searing pain that followed felt like my entire body had been shattered. As my consciousness faded, I saw Emily's vicious smile of success. All because she had been fired and wanted to help out at my store handling payments. I refused her. The next second, she burst into tears and threw herself onto me, then subtly pushed me again. She put on a performance, crying dramatically to the surrounding pedestrians. Please help my sister. My phone was right in my pocket, but she deliberately delayed, begging strangers to call instead. Rage boiled inside me. The overwhelming emotion made me cough up blood again. Emily had calculated it all. Whether I died or ended up crippled, she would take the opportunity to sell off my shop. My life would be completely destroyed. But what she hadn't expected was that I, a disabled woman, would end up marrying into the ultra-wealthy Whitmore family. I lived the lavish high society life she had always dreamed of. That extravagant life was like a constant alarm bell ringing in Emily's ears, reminding her again and again that the sister she looked down on was living a life of luxury and admiration. It stabbed at her like a knife to the heart. She couldn't accept it. She tried repeatedly to take my place, but every attempt ended in failure. Outside the hospital's operating room, I sat absent-mindedly, trying to sort through the chaos in my mind since being reborn. A sudden slap, hot and fierce, jolted me back to reality. Then came a storm of curses and blame. Are you useless? You couldn't even protect your sister? Why wasn't it you who got hit by the car? My mother stared at me like I was her mortal enemy. My father stood by, face gloomy and silent, his cowardice on full display. The favoritism was blatant. There was only one bike for getting to school, and Emily always got to ride it. I walked. Every season, they'd take her shopping for new clothes while I was stuck wearing oversized old boys' clothes my cousin no longer wanted. They sent her to every hobby class under the sun, regardless of whether she actually learned anything or just played around. Meanwhile, I had to struggle just to afford books. In my previous life, after I woke up in the hospital, I never regained feeling below the waist. My long legs were amputated, leaving only a little over 20 centimeters behind. There wasn't a single family member by my side, only a nurse quietly recording my condition. It wasn't until the hospital urged me to pay the bill that I found out my parents and Emily had used the car accident compensation money to go on vacation. I couldn't reach them by phone either. Left with no choice, I paid the hospital fees with the small amount of money I had secretly and painfully saved up over time. The nurses who came to check in on me would often whisper indignantly behind my back, outraged on my behalf. But I remained eerily quiet the whole time, calmly accepting the fact that I'd lost my legs and had been betrayed. One evening, the blood-red sun was setting outside the window. I sat alone on the hospital bed. When I glanced down and saw my mutilated legs, the grief and bitterness inside me snowballed, growing bigger and heavier until it finally crushed some nerve inside me. The tears came all at once, choking me. I didn't see them again until the day I was discharged. My parents and Emily, faces glowing, happily returned from their trip. But now, with Emily hurt, they had rushed over from work in a panic. Thinking about the absurdity of it all, I gave a hollow tug at the corner of my lips. She ran toward the car on her own, I said flatly. Before I could finish, my dad slapped me hard across the face, far harder than my mom ever had. The blow split the corner of my mouth and left my ears ringing. "Belle, do you take us for fools?" I pressed my tongue against the inside of my cheek and let out a sneer. "Believe what you want. If you think I tried to murder her, go ahead. Report me and let the police throw me in jail." It was rare for me to talk back like that with such a cold expression. My parents were stunned for a second, caught off guard. Just as they were about to lash out again, the doors to the operating room swung open. The doctor came out and they immediately rushed over to ask about Emily. Emily had only just regained consciousness when reporters started swarming the hospital. Everyone wanted to interview the heroic little sister, who had sacrificed herself to save me. For days, multiple media outlets covered our heartwarming story of sisterly love, plastering it across headlines. Social media was flooded with praise, calling Emily a kind and beautiful angel. People made posts praying for her recovery. Our once quiet hospital room had now turned into a buzzing beehive of attention. "Miss, your love for your sister is truly remarkable." That's right. These days, it's rare to see siblings not at odds, but you still hold such a pure and kind heart, throwing yourself in harm's way to protect your sister. You're a beautiful soul. Someone like you is bound to be rewarded. That's right. And you don't need to worry about the medical expenses. A lot of charities and online donors are contributing to your recovery. Despite her pale and weakened face, Emily still managed to beam brightly at the cameras, looking like the very picture of a gentle, resilient flower. Her delicate appearance and forced smile made netizens swoon all over again. After the reporters left, I brought her meal over and set it on the small tray in front of her. Emily looked at me with a glowing, triumphant smile. "This time, sis, I'm going to gain both fame and fortune." I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just an overwhelming desire to get away from her and check in on my shop. It was almost dinner rush, and the store was probably busy. I wondered if there were enough staff on hand. I replied casually, "Oh well, I wish you success then." Seeing how indifferent I was, her expression twisted for a second, but then she suddenly looked pleased again, as if remembering something. If I guessed right, she was probably eagerly anticipating the fated encounter with that man in 3 months. I gathered my things to leave the room. Just as I opened the door, Emily called out confidently behind me, "Belle, this time I'll be the lucky one." My back still to her, I gripped the door handle tightly and let out a cold, silent laugh. "Lucky? That word again? What a damn joke. If I hadn't pushed you, you never would have had that kind of luck. Marrying such an amazing man, living in a mansion worth millions, being waited on hand and foot. You must have saved the world in a past life to end up with someone like Vincent. You're living a life of wealth and privilege, all thanks to your little sister. So, how about coughing up another $10 million? Ungrateful brat. Can't even show a little appreciation. Every time I heard Emily and my parents shamelessly spit out lines like that, I clenched my jaw so hard I nearly shattered a molar. I wanted to scream. If this is your idea of luck, then take it. I'll gift it to all of you. Their so-called luck meant losing both my legs, being chained to a wheelchair for the rest of my life, and losing all my freedom forever. Every time I lost control of my bladder due to lingering complications from the accident, I had to endure the disgusted glances from the house staff. But the most despicable of all was that man, praised by countless people as the perfect husband. He used to take a knife and slice at my legs over and over again. I would wake up from nightmares screaming in pain. At the same time, Emily shamelessly clung to her nonsense about blessings, constantly acting as if she had done me a favor. I couldn't move freely anymore and had no interest in luxuries or shopping. I just wanted peace and quiet. The $10 million Vincent gave me as monthly spending money. I gave half of it to Emily every month. But gratitude turned into resentment. A person's greed is like a snake swallowing an elephant. Her appetite and ambition only grew larger. In the end, she even dared to think she could replace me. On the third year of our marriage, on my 27th birthday, Vincent threw me a lavish party on the rooftop of a hotel owned by his corporation. Emily had disguised herself as a server and snuck into my private room, hiding a fruit knife up her sleeve. She stabbed each of my legs 4 times. The final strike plunged straight into my heart. I died, staring wide-eyed in horror as she laughed, wild and euphoric. When the police arrived, Emily panicked and tried to escape, only to fall from the high-rise building. In that moment, I was almost grateful. She gave me a quick death and spared me from continuing a life of endless pain and torment. It's been over 2 months since the car accident. Emily had long been discharged and was back home enjoying her recovery. She was pampered with delicious food and daily care. Her complexion was glowing. She shamelessly spent the compensation and donation money on luxury items she bought online. Meanwhile, I was working from dawn to dusk, often sleeping directly at the restaurant to avoid seeing things or people I didn't want to see. After only a few years in the workforce, I had quit and used every penny I'd scraped together to open a tiny home-style restaurant in the college town commercial district. In my previous life, while I was still hospitalized, my parents secretly contacted the landlord, terminated the lease, and took the money. My restaurant, along with my life, completely crumbled. But this time, Emily was the one who rushed into the accident. And in these past few months, I threw myself into the restaurant. I used all the service and management insights I had picked up from high-end restaurants and hotels in my past life to create a tailored marketing strategy and growth plan for my little place. Business was booming more and more each day. That sense of accomplishment was growing steadily, too. At the very least, I had made some good out of this second chance at life. That evening, exhausted, I stopped by home to grab a few things. As soon as I opened the door, I saw the 4 of them sitting around the dinner table, chatting and laughing like a happy family. My sudden appearance felt completely out of place, like I was an intruder. My eyes happened to glance at the extra person at the table. The moment I recognized that familiar face, it felt like I'd fallen into an icy abyss. My blood ran cold, and all the terrifying memories from my previous life surged back like a tidal wave. My hands started to shake uncontrollably, and my breathing grew rapid. I could feel a phantom hand brushing down my thigh, the exact place where my legs had been amputated. A phantom pain, cut after cut, stabbed through the memory of flesh that was no longer there. "What are you standing there like a statue for? You think you're the door?" my mom snapped, putting down her chopsticks. She frowned at me with impatience and annoyance. Emily's expression flickered with nervous guilt when she noticed how strange I looked. She clutched the blanket over her lap tightly, then glanced down at her legs. Whatever she saw must have reassured her because her gaze turned confident again. She tilted her head slightly and looked at the man beside her. Vincent. Vincent, with his ever-deep unreadable eyes, glanced at me with mild confusion, the way one would look at a stranger. When he saw Emily looking at him, he turned to her and smiled gently. Then he adjusted the blanket on her lap with care, his fingers brushing casually across her leg. Emily's tense face instantly relaxed. She curled her eyes into a sweet smile, acting bashful and delicate, then cast me a smug and provocative look. I took in the entire scene and finally I could breathe again. My dad, Charles, spoke up with barely concealed excitement. "This is Mr. Vincent, a very accomplished young man. He's the chairman of the Whitmore Group, and he's your sister's boyfriend." My mom's face lit up with joy, her cheeks wrinkled from grinning so hard. She kept looking Vincent up and down, satisfaction glowing in her eyes like she already wanted him as her son-in-law. I nodded briefly in greeting, letting the corners of my mouth twitch into the faintest smile before quickly retreating to my cramped little bedroom. I shut the door and locked it from the inside. I didn't care what my mom was saying about me being rude behind my back. I leaned against the door, gasping for air. But it wasn't air I was after. It was freedom. Inside the room, I laughed and cried like a lunatic, clutching my mouth with both hands to silence the sound. I bit down so hard on my palm that I drew blood, leaving a red crescent-shaped mark from my teeth. I didn't dare make the slightest sound of celebration, as if I were watching a one-person masquerade of madness. And finally, in this life, I thought I could escape Vincent. Escape the never-ending nightmare. In my past life, when Emily accidentally found out that Vincent only loved me because of his twisted obsession with body deformity, she completely broke down. She cried and screamed as she confessed the truth about the car accident that day, her voice laced with bitter resentment. "If I hadn't pushed you in front of that car and turned you into a... Why would Vincent have ever looked at you? I'm clearly the prettier one." My parents looked at her in utter disbelief. Deep down, some faint trace of family affection made me hope. Hope that they would be furious with her, that even if they couldn't bear to hand Emily over to the police, they'd at least scold her. But what my mom said next shattered me completely. "Oh, Emily," she sighed. "Why would you let someone else reap the benefits of your sacrifice?" She was regretting Emily's decision. For Emily's sake, that one offhand sentence crushed the last bit of my heart. Emily yanked me from my wheelchair and pushed me to the ground. I lay there, pale, limp, and smiling bitterly. My fingers clutched tightly at the fabric of my shirt. My eyes stung, but I didn't dare blink. I was afraid I'd cry, and I didn't want to waste tears on them. How dare they? How could I have ever still held hope for this family? That was the moment I gave up completely. Let it all go, I thought. Let this cruel and biased family rot in the past. At least I still had the twisted version of love Vincent offered me. Even if his feelings came from a fetish, even if he only loved me because of my disability, at least it was still love. I wasn't the unloved fool anymore. And so I walked out of the wolf's den and straight into a tiger's jaws. No one knew that the outwardly gentle, affectionate CEO of Whitmore Group was, behind closed doors, a complete lunatic. Not only did he have a fetish for mutilation, he was obsessed with flesh. That's right. He found women's damaged bodies visually delicious, especially the tender flesh that regrows around amputated limbs. On the morning of our wedding, the second day of marriage, sunlight streamed through the window into our opulent bridal suite. When I opened my eyes, I found myself tied to the bed. My upper body couldn't move, and my lower half had been disconnected from my brain since the accident. Vincent stood at the bedside holding a syringe. His smile was as gentle as always, just like before we married, but deep in his eyes was a barely contained maniacal excitement. "How perfect," he said sweetly. "You're awake right on time, Belle." As I stared at him in horror, he injected an anesthetic into what remained of my thigh. The next moment, I watched in stunned disbelief as he picked up a scalpel gleaming under the light. He bent over me and with his gloved hands, gently caressed the skin around my stump, then slowly, carefully began slicing into it. He peeled away tender slivers of new flesh and placed them one by one onto a delicate porcelain plate. My eyes widened in terror. I'd bitten my trembling lower lip until it bled, and still I felt nothing below my waist. When he finally looked at the plate, now holding 4 or 5 strips of flesh, he nodded in satisfaction. Perfect already. A horrifying thought flashed through my mind. Was he going to eat it? Very few people knew that Vincent hadn't studied finance or management in college. His major was medicine. He calmly stopped the bleeding, bandaged the wound, and tied it with a neat little butterfly knot. Then he gently untied me and lifted me into the wheelchair. It was like he'd become someone else entirely. His tenderness felt chillingly rehearsed. I kept my face perfectly still, pretending to be calm, but inside I was screaming, "Freak! Lunatic!" He carried me downstairs and seated me at the dining table. Then he took the plate of flesh into the kitchen. I turned my trembling head and looked through the glass door, watching his silhouette as he cooked. The sound of meat sizzling and hot oil filled the air. Goosebumps erupted across my skin and cold sweat soaked my back. Every step Vincent took was confirming my terrifying suspicion. His movements in the kitchen were fluid, practiced, nothing like a pampered heir playing pretend. Long before our wedding, he had already been cooking for me, often making meals himself. A powerful corporate leader by day, a devoted partner by night. It was the kind of gesture that would melt any woman's heart, especially mine, someone who had grown up starved for love. But now, as I watched him walk out of the kitchen with that plate in hand, his warmth had turned into something grotesque. My throat went dry. Fear clouded my face as I stared at the still steaming meat. The surreal scene at the table, the twisted anticipation of what was to come, had long since overtaken the physical fear of being cut. The food was placed in front of me. Vincent closed his eyes and took a deep breath through his nose, a satisfied smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "Belle, doesn't it smell amazing?" he asked softly. "Didn't you always say my cooking was the best?" This time, I used the finest ingredients in the world. I didn't add a single grain of seasoning, just perfect heat control, letting the natural flavor come through. I pressed my lips tightly together. My hands were shaking so hard they started to cramp. A nauseating churn was already rising from my stomach, but I didn't dare say a word. I was terrified he'd follow up with, "If it smells that good, why don't you try a bite?" The strange scent wafting off that plate of meat was disturbingly unfamiliar, and yet familiar. He picked up a knife and fork, elegantly cutting the meat into small pieces. He placed one into his mouth with refined grace. Every movement was so composed, so cultured. If only he wasn't eating me. At last, the hope I had clung to completely died. I hadn't eaten all morning, and watching him devour the meat pushed me past my limit. I turned my head sharply to the side, bracing myself against the table, and vomited what little was left in my stomach. Even bile came up in the end. The floor was covered in a mess of vomit. Instead of getting angry, Vincent looked even more pleased. I squeezed my eyes shut. Blood drained from my face as I sat in silent despair. In that moment, I fully realized the kind of lunatic I had married. A bitter smile twisted my lips. Cold tears slid down my cheeks. The hatred that had long been simmering in my heart finally reached its boiling point. They say marriage is a woman's second chance at life, sometimes even more important than the family you're born into. But life had been cruel to me twice. First, it gave me a family that was hopelessly biased. Then it handed me over to a man who wore civility like a mask to cover the beast beneath. Across the table, Vincent wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked at me as if nothing had happened. His expression was calm, even affectionate. When he noticed the tears on my face, he tilted his head slightly and asked gently, "Belle, are you hungry?" Before I could even force out a horrified no, he had already picked up the villa's intercom and called the house staff to bring breakfast for my wife. Suddenly, there was a rhythmic knock at the door behind me, dragging my consciousness back to the present. A low voice came from outside, so familiar it felt like my soul froze on the spot. It was like hearing a devil whisper my name. "Belle, can you open the door? Emily would like you to come to her room." I didn't come to my senses until I stood in front of Emily's door, safely out of Vincent's line of sight. I dug my nails into my palm, the sharp pain bringing me back to reality. Only then did I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and opened the door. Emily was staring down at her designer skirt, which was now darkened with a large wet stain. I glanced at it and immediately understood she had wet herself. Embarrassment was frozen on her face. When she realized I was there, she flinched, then quickly tried to recover her composure. "What are you standing there for? Get over here and help me." My lashes lowered slightly, hiding the amusement in my eyes. I couldn't hold back the small curve of my lips. Didn't she know? Every unearned gift comes with a price already set by the devil. Her face turned bright red with rage. She glared at me furiously. "Are you laughing at me?" "No," I replied flatly. "You must be hallucinating." I looked up and met her eyes with a cold, expressionless stare. But even if I were, so what? You're still the one who has to beg me to help you change clothes. She lifted her chin slightly. In a few days, you won't even have the right to do that. Once I marry into the Whitmore family, I'll have servants waiting on me hand and foot. The light in her eyes shimmered with anticipation. She was truly dreaming about the happy life she thought marriage would bring. Reborn once and still this stupid, still this laughable. But ignorance breeds fearlessness. I hoped that when the blade touched her flesh, she'd still be just as proud and sure of herself. She gave me a disdainful glance. Umph, you won't even be worthy of carrying my shoes. Once I had finished helping her change into clean clothes, my gaze flicked lightly past the empty space beneath her skirt. Emily suddenly realized what she just said didn't quite make sense. Her face twisted with fury, and she threw the soiled clothes at me. I calmly took a step to the side and avoided it without effort. Ignoring the twisted, furious look on Emily's face, I stepped over the pile of soiled clothes and left the house without looking back. Her real blessing was still yet to come. In my past life, on the day Vincent proposed to me, the scene had been extravagant and romantic beyond belief. The entire proposal was broadcast live on the giant screen at the top of the Whitmore Group headquarters, drawing gasps from countless onlookers. What no one saw was Emily standing in the shadows, shaking with rage, eyes burning as she watched the spectacle unfold. Maybe that's why this time around, after Vincent's proposal was a success, Emily specifically requested that I be her bridesmaid, determined to force me to witness how she would now be the one to steal my fate. On the wedding day, I stood with a faint smile, looking around the venue. Aside from the decor being slightly more lavish per Emily's demanding taste, everything else played out exactly like before. Just like last time, dozens of reporters flocked to the scene, eager to write glowing headlines about the wedding of the century. The chairman of Whitmore Group, a young, brilliant CEO, marrying a woman from an ordinary background, one who couldn't even walk. Even the trending hashtags were identical to my previous life. Back then, Emily had stormed into my dressing room in a fury, her eyes blazing with jealousy, sweeping inch by inch over my hand-sewn, custom-made million-dollar wedding gown before settling on the hollow space beneath the skirt. If I hadn't pushed you back then, you'd never have become Mrs. Whitmore, she growled. You think you deserve all this? That should have been my life, my dress, my wedding. Give it back, you bitch. Like a madwoman, she lunged at me, clawing at the gown. The makeup artist couldn't hold her back and soon shouted for help. Vincent, in the middle of an interview, rushed in to shield me in his arms, coldly ordering his bodyguards to throw Emily out. She was dragged away, humiliated and wild with rage. But this time, I stood silently in my bridesmaid dress, watching from the side as they exchanged rings and kissed. Vincent then pulled Emily into a warm embrace, beaming with affection. The applause from the guests grew louder and louder. I clapped too, smiling as I did, my lips curled into a cold arc. Congratulations, Emily, I thought. This time, may your blessing be endless. Let's see how much of it you can handle. Since I was helping with the ceremony, I stayed overnight in their bridal suite. The next morning, I hid halfway behind a column on the second floor, watching with interest what unfolded at the breakfast table downstairs. Emily was curled up in her chair, pale and trembling. Her eyes stared helplessly as Vincent delicately lifted a silver fork, placing a piece of meat into his mouth. A second later, she turned away and retched violently, unable to hold it in. The bitter stench filled the air. Emily, who had always been spoiled and temperamental, couldn't stop herself from cursing. What the hell is wrong with you? You're insane. Even I paused, saying something like that. She had just triggered Vincent's biggest nerve. As expected, Vincent froze mid-chew. I'm not insane. The next second, the knife and fork clattered to the floor. He stood and slapped Emily hard across the face. I told you I'm not insane. I just love you too much. Emily was thrown to the floor by the force of the blow, eyes brimming with terrified tears. She clutched at the cold tile with trembling fingers and sobbed uncontrollably, trying to crawl away. But Vincent wasn't done. He stepped forward and grabbed her by the jaw, gripping her tightly as he whispered again and again. Don't be scared, Emily. I just love you too much. I love you so much. I want to become one with you. You understand, right? Good girl. You understand, don't you? His voice was disturbingly tender, his tone obsessive. His eyes gleamed with madness. Emily's face twisted in terror, but she didn't dare defy him. She nodded with her neck pulled in, trying to make herself smaller. Her skirt had been pushed aside and lay in a messy heap. The naked, mutilated remains of her legs were fully exposed. Her skin was marked with countless faint fingerprints, like someone had obsessively stroked and caressed it over and over again. I had seen those marks before when I helped her into her wedding gown. Back then, she had seemed proud of them. After all, right after Vincent proposed, she couldn't wait to move into his mansion. That day, a luxury car suddenly pulled up in front of my restaurant. In this college town, that sort of thing was rare, especially since no matter how popular my restaurant was, it was still just a humble little spot. I was standing at the entrance, confused, when I saw a smart wheelchair being unloaded first. Then Emily, now thinner than before, was carried out of the car by a bodyguard in a suit and placed in the chair. She looked proud, smug, like a clown in a circus, pretending to be royalty. Her gaze swept across the restaurant with disdain. Her expression filled with thinly veiled contempt. I frowned. Lunch rush was about to start. I just hoped she wouldn't cause a scene and disrupt business. But as she rolled inside, I couldn't help but notice how much weight she'd lost. Clearly, married life hadn't done her appetite any favors. Not even the thick, expensive foundation could hide the exhaustion beneath her skin. The darkness under her eyes was faint but unmistakable. Before I could say a word, she struck first. Lifting her hands slightly, she flashed a massive diamond ring that sparkled in the light. "Oh my sis, why do you smell like grease and smoke?" she said with exaggerated concern. "And your skin's looking a bit rough too. Honestly, I feel bad saying it, but you smell like leftover food. At your age, who's going to want to marry you smelling like that? What are you even doing here?" I asked flatly. "Oh, I've just had too much of those fancy restaurants lately. I wanted something simple, comfort food. And I suddenly thought of your cooking. You're running a business, right? Surely you wouldn't turn away a customer." Before I could respond, she gestured to her bodyguard, who pushed her wheelchair straight to a window seat. I was busy serving other customers when I suddenly heard her loud, dramatic voice shout from across the room. "Oh, this is disgusting. What is this? There's a hair in my food." The dining room fell silent. Everyone froze mid-bite and began looking down at their own plates. Unsettled, I quickly walked over to her table. There was a black hair lying on top of the dish. I glanced at Emily's carefully styled chestnut brown waves, then at the black-haired bodyguard standing by the table. I gave a faint, unreadable smile. "I take pride in the cleanliness and food safety of my restaurant," I said calmly, "and I welcome any scrutiny. Technologies have come a long way, so if necessary, I'm more than willing to spend a little money to have this hair tested at a hospital for DNA. We'll see whether it came from one of my staff or maybe from you or him." A flicker of panic crossed the bodyguard's face. I bent down, reaching to pick up the hair using a disposable glove when Emily suddenly grabbed my wrist, her expression stiff as she forced a smile. "Sis, I was just joking. It's probably this useless bodyguard again. Maybe he shed a hair or something. It's got nothing to do with you." All around the restaurant, customers started whispering, pointing in her direction. "Who is that woman? She looks so familiar. Oh, isn't she the one from that news story? The sister who saved her sibling in that car crash. But she's acting kind of weird." Her face turned beet red. As more and more people began murmuring, Emily finally snapped. She ordered her bodyguard to take her back to the car. I watched her leave, flustered and defeated, and scoffed quietly. What a pathetic little stunt. Then I turned back to my customers, smiled, and bowed deeply. "I'm truly sorry for the disturbance," I said warmly. "To make it up to you, everyone's meal today is half off. Please accept this as my apology." The dining room immediately erupted in cheers and applause. Day after day, Emily's mental state visibly declined while my restaurant's business grew stronger than ever. Once again, our lives had split along two very different paths. One stormy night, with thunder and lightning raging outside, my mom suddenly called and demanded I return home. She threatened to jump off the roof and leave behind a suicide note, blaming me if I didn't show up. When I got there, Emily was in a full-blown meltdown, screaming hysterically. She'd smashed everything in the living room that could be broken. Crying and yelling. She said she wanted a divorce. My mom sobbed as she tried to calm her down and hesitantly suggested, maybe it's time to consider separation. Before she could finish, my dad shot her a dark glare. It's not even a life or death issue, Emily. Can't you just endure it? Clearly, he didn't want to lose the cushy managerial position Vincent had given him. When I arrived, my mom rushed over and practically shoved Emily toward me. You're back. Good. Take your sister to her room now. She's upset. As her older sister, it's your job to comfort her. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Comfort her? What they really wanted was for her to use me as a punching bag to take out all her anger on me until she calmed down. In the bedroom, Emily's eyes were bloodshot, her face twisted with rage. Why didn't you tell me? She shouted. I knelt down slowly, gently touched the white butterfly-shaped bandage, then looked up and smiled at her innocently. Tell you what. Vincent, he eats people. Belle. Stop playing dumb with me, she screamed. You were reborn too. Don't think I didn't figure it out. I let out a low, sarcastic laugh. Before the wedding, you guarded him like a hawk, like I was a wolf trying to steal him away. You practically clung to him 24/7. When would I have even had the chance to warn you? My expression shifted. I raised an eyebrow and looked her up and down, amused by how utterly broken she looked. Then I asked casually, so, Emily, wasn't this exactly what you wanted in the second life? A wealthy housewife's life dripping in luxury, endless jewelry and designer brands at your fingertips? Unrestricted access to upscale clubs and fine dining. This is the blessing you dreamed of in your last life. Remember? You better enjoy it while you can. She instinctively raised her hand just like she had so many times before, ready to slap me. But I stood upright with ease and grabbed her wrist midair, looking down at her pathetic, impotent rage from above. I smacked her across the face. Emily, are you trying to die? She struggled in her wheelchair, attempting to retaliate, but she couldn't manage it. Frustration nearly drove her mad. I gave her a second slap on the other cheek. Careful, she hissed through clenched teeth. I'll have Vincent kill you. I scoffed and curled my lips. You think I don't know Vincent? I said mockingly. He's emotionally detached. He doesn't know how to cherish anyone. To him, you're nothing but a walking buffet that suits his fetish. As long as I don't damage your legs, he won't care if I slap you twice or 20 times. After all, in my previous life, the first time I went back to my parents' house after getting married, I begged them to help me divorce him while Vincent was away. They locked me in the storage room. Emily slapped me 20 times to vent her anger, cursing me for being ungrateful. When Vincent came to take me home, he glanced coldly at my swollen, bruised face and said nothing. Emily, who had been panicking just moments before, immediately straightened up, smug and gloating. Her eyes screamed, "See, even your husband doesn't care about you. No one does. You're just trash." My hair had fallen into a tangled mess, hiding my face, which was covered in scratches, and my dull, lifeless eyes. My fingernails dug into my palms so hard that one cracked off. I looked at Emily, who was still screaming and shrieking, and gave her another slap without a second thought. A flicker of violence sparked in my gaze. Now she was finally shaken. Real fear flickered in her eyes. She shrank into the wheelchair and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." But that occasional gleam of malice in her eyes told me she was already planning revenge the moment she recovered. My mom called us both out for dinner. With a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth, I wheeled Emily out of the bedroom. When my mom saw her face all red and swollen, she immediately put down her chopsticks and rushed over. "Mom, Belle hit me. That little, __, slapped me in the bedroom," Emily wailed, milking the pity card for all it was worth, eager to see me punished. "You ungrateful brat," my mom screamed. "How dare you hit your sister? Are you sick of living?" My dad's face darkened. He stepped toward me while my mom had already raised her hand to slap me. But I smiled calmly and held up my phone. "I've been recording ever since I walked in," I said coolly. "Everything, your talk about divorcing Vincent to get half his fortune. It's all on tape." I turned to my dad. Don't bother trying to take the phone. I've already backed up the recording and scheduled it to send automatically. Even if you manage to steal it, it'll still go straight to Vincent." At that, both of them froze, instantly cautious. Emily gripped the blanket on her lap tightly, eyes flickering with resentment. Then she suddenly spoke up. "Mom, Dad, I've thought it through. I'm not divorcing Vincent." She paused for effect, then smiled wickedly. "But being a rich wife is a little boring. Maybe Belle should let me take over her restaurant. At least that way, I'll have something to do." She turned to me, her smile venomous and triumphant. "Sis, I've changed my mind. I'm not getting divorced. So that recording, it's useless now. I'm still Vincent's wife after all." My parents instantly turned and stared at me like a pair of ravenous wolves, eyes full of greed and calculation. Unbelievable, I thought. They really believe they're entitled to everything I've worked for. I had poured my heart and soul into that restaurant, building it up from nothing. Why should I just hand it over? I refused firmly. Then all three of them turned to moral blackmail, waving the accident over my head again. "If you had protected your sister properly, she wouldn't have gotten hit by that car. Wouldn't have lost her legs. Wouldn't have ended up married to that lunatic. You're our daughter. That restaurant of yours, it's ours too. We gave birth to you, raised you. If we tell you to give the restaurant to Emily, then you should just do it." Listening to their shameless, twisted logic, I almost burst out laughing. If they want to play dirty, fine. I can play dirty too. I turned around and immediately called Vincent, informing him that his wife had run away from home and was already planning a divorce without his knowledge. "The Whitmore estate isn't some place you can come and go from at will," I told him. Emily should have known better. Less than an hour later, no matter how much Emily cried, screamed, or begged, the bodyguards had already arrived. Vincent acted as if he hadn't seen or heard a thing. His expression was calm, his voice warm and polite. "Emily's just being a little dramatic. Sorry she disturbed you. I'll send a bit of money to you both later as an apology." My parents' expressions shifted repeatedly, but when they saw 5 bodyguards in black forcibly drag Emily into the car, panic flickered across their faces. In the end, none of them dared say a word. After that, my life finally returned to peace. I even began planning for a second restaurant location. That night, just as I was helping my staff clean up to close the shop, one of them suddenly gasped and lifted their phone for me to see. On the screen was Emily, wearing a fake bare-faced look with heavy under-eye makeup, sobbing like a fragile porcelain doll. She looked even thinner than before, almost just skin and bones, which somehow added weight to her accusations. She seemed mentally off. Her words were jumbled, disconnected. "I don't know why, but ever since we were little, my sister just never liked me. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I deserve it." Her voice broke into hiccuping sobs. The comments section was flooded with sympathetic responses, and countless others viciously cursed me out. At the same time, people claiming to be our neighbors flooded the internet, claiming they'd witnessed me bullying Emily for years. They uploaded countless blurry photos as proof. The kind of images so unclear even our own mother wouldn't recognize who was in them. In no time, I and my restaurant were trending online for all the wrong reasons. I let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh and shook my head. Just then, something crashed against the window. A few young men had started throwing trash and rocks at my storefront. My expression turned cold. I picked up my phone and dialed the police. "I'd like to report property damage," I said. "An online defamation. Someone spreading malicious falsehoods about me and inciting harassment." The next day, as soon as I arrived at the station to give a statement, an officer handed me a glass of water with a smile. Before we could even finish gathering evidence, he said, a flood of counter-evidence started pouring in online. Photos, posts, eyewitness accounts, an avalanche of truth had swept through the internet, all proving my innocence. There were records and testimonials from relatives and family friends, exposing years of favoritism and cruelty from my parents. One showed me kneeling outside our house in the middle of the night, punished without food. Another captured my father slapping me so hard my cheeks swelled as my parents laughed, and let Emily beat me on top of that. Photos and videos, one after another, undeniable. Even more damning were clips from Emily's school days, showing her bullying me, her own sister, in front of teachers and classmates. With everything laid bare, the online mob went silent, stunned. Then the tide turned. People began cursing Emily, calling her evil from birth. My parents were condemned for being monsters, masquerading as parents. As I watched the complete reversal, I furrowed my brow. So much evidence, so many witnesses gathered and organized in such a short time, and even reposted by dozens of major influencers. Only one person had that kind of power. I dialed a number I hadn't called in a long while. "Vincent, why did you help me?" I asked quietly. "Why would you help destroy your own wife?" The day of my second restaurant's grand opening, a luxury car parked down the block. It didn't leave. It just sat there quietly until the busy lunch rush finally ended, and the place began to settle. I wiped my hands, walked over, and tapped on the window. It rolled down, revealing Vincent's familiar face. His expression was flat, unreadable. "Congratulations, your business is doing really well." I raised an eyebrow slightly and nodded. "Is this what you think my dream looks like?" "No," he said. "It's your ideal." There was a dark flicker in his eyes, an emotion I couldn't name. He lowered his head slightly and said in a hoarse voice, "You'll definitely make that ideal come true." Before I could reply, a massive bouquet of sunflowers was shoved into my arms. I instinctively went to hand it back, but the window had already rolled up, and the car pulled away with a low roar, leaving me standing there with a heavy, unreadable expression. I walked a few steps to the nearest trash can and tossed the bouquet inside. During our last phone call, Vincent hadn't said anything. Just before hanging up, I'd heard a faint sigh on the line. 3 months passed before I heard news of those two lunatics again. It was on a local TV news segment covering law and justice. The Whitmore family had long dabbled in shady businesses. Though they had tried to clean up their image, the foundation remained filthy. During a secret investigation, the police discovered the Whitmore Group had committed tax evasion on a massive scale, over $10 billion. And when officers went to arrest Vincent at his estate, they accidentally uncovered another case. Blood was everywhere, soaking into the bedroom floor. Used gauze and syringes lay scattered around the room. The familiar surgical scalpel was embedded in Vincent's abdomen. Emily was curled up in a corner of the room. Her mutilated legs and face were strewn with blood. Her limbs distorted and uneven, bleeding profusely. Her eyes were vacant, staring blankly at the fresh chunks of flesh lying just feet away on the floor. Later, after they were both rushed to the hospital, Vincent was resuscitated and stabilized, but he now faced serious legal charges. Emily, however, was evaluated by a psychiatric team and diagnosed with severe mental instability. Years of physical abuse and psychological torment had finally shattered her mind. She had completely lost touch with reality. That shocking, headline-grabbing scandal eventually came to a close. A bolt of lightning lit up the night sky and rain poured across the city, washing away the filth hiding in the dark. 6 months later, my restaurant chain had expanded into several surrounding cities. Across all my locations, we offered jobs suited to individuals with disabilities, tasks they could confidently handle. Customers with valid disability IDs received meals at half price. I also donated 5% of our annual profits to special education programs. Because I had once stood in the storm, I wanted to offer others whatever umbrella I could hold up. I was lucky, but there were still many people trapped in misery. I wanted to pull them out of it, at least a little, if I could. Vincent went bankrupt. Emily was institutionalized. My father lost his job and sat around at home. Only then did they seem to remember they had another daughter. A backup, a spare. They became like ghosts that wouldn't leave me alone, pestering me whenever they got the chance. They tried setting me up with the rich, but hideous sons of people they barely knew. My mother, just this month alone, had already threatened suicide 4 times to manipulate me. I stopped in my tracks and slowly turned around. My lips curled into a mocking smile. "Suicide?" I said, my tone dripping with scorn. "Do you really think someone as selfish, greedy, and terrified of death as you would ever have the guts?" I narrowed my eyes. "You're sticking green onions up your nose and trying to act like a howitzer. Who are you trying to fool? If you piss me off," I added, "I'll sell every single one of my restaurants and vanish." Let's see where you'll go to get your allowance then. So from now on, don't waste your time trying to guilt me. I'll transfer your monthly support like clockwork. If one day you die, fine. Just give me a heads up, and I'll handle your funeral arrangements. I didn't bother looking at their ashen faces. I had somewhere more important to be anyway. The grand opening ceremony of my new restaurant out of state.